Welcome to Performance with Project. All good project managers ensure that they have the right people, right resources, and the right materials in order to get the job done. And in Microsoft Project, you are presented with a number of tools that you can use to ensure that you balance, plan, and report in a way that shows that you have full control of the project. So, what are we going to look at in today's video? Well, we're going to look at ways in which we can make sure that we are accurately representing the resources that we're using, making sure that these are estimated properly. We'll also look at how we can connect these resources to the jobs and tasks within our project schedule. And then finally, and you're going to like this, is we're going to look at some really cool ways in which Microsoft Project can show and report on your resource usage, which is excellent for reporting purposes. So let's begin. Now, at this stage of the project, you would have already brainstormed or indeed documented all of the steps that you need, the tasks and the predecessors and linkages within those tasks to form a project schedule. And if you want a bit of revision or want to review good ways in which to do this, definitely have a look at videos 1, 2, and 3 of the Performance with Project series, because there's some really neat hints and tips that will help you get to this point. But at this point, we want to focus on our resources and including these resources in on our project. So there are 3 categories, shall we say, of resources that are important. There are your people resources, there are your materials, and then more of your miscellaneous or one-off costs that you need in order to get the job done. So it's often a good idea prior to jumping into your resource sheet to perhaps go through and look at the tasks to see where you'll need people, material, and resources. Now, just looking at this particular example, you can see check for any required licenses, any permits or permissions. So we can already see straight away that we're going to need council fees or other permits in order to complete this project. We would already have an idea of the people that we have in the team. Perhaps we've already got a project team already lined up that we can use for this project. And as we go through, we can see that there is drink and food and resources that are required. So these could be classified in the same size and type as materials. And of course, the decorations, perhaps some signage and so forth as we go across, paint, stationery, and all of those things. So by now, we probably should have a good list of things that we can include in our resource sheet. So let's jump to our resource sheet. To get to your resource sheet, you go to the top right left hand corner of your worksheet, click down, and you'll see here resource sheet. So click that, and you can see, no surprise, it's a blank sheet. So we're probably at this point in time, we want to put in our project team and some of the resources that we have already identified that we're going to need in terms of materials and miscellaneous items. So I'll document those things now. Now we've documented all of our resources in the resource sheet, we need to classify them according to their resource categories. So work obviously relates to human resources. So John, Stacey, Peter, and Joanne all come under the work category in the type column. Now we have paint, paper, stationery, food, and drink. Now these are obviously going to be a different category, and they come under materials. So we should classify all of these as materials. Now what about council fees? Well, these are really one-off fees that we'll have to apply at certain points within the project. So they are neither work nor material, but they are a cost. And you notice that all of these cells associated with it are left blank. We actually get into the schedule itself and apply the actual costings to that when we connect it to the actual task. So we'll cover that shortly. But first of all, let's start to frame and put together the costs associated with our project team. So you'll see that there are 5 important columns here that we need to address with respect to our people resources. Now the maximum column, well, that's indicative of the maximum allowable time for them to work on this project. Now you might wonder, well, what does that mean? Well, say for instance if someone was part-time, was a part-time employee, say only worked 3 days a week out of a 5-day week. Well, straight away, the most maximum time you could put to this project would be 60%, indicative of the 60%, 3 days out of 5. You also might have a situation too where the resource, for example, John here, may be already allocated to other projects. So in this maximum column, we'd also take those into consideration too. So we might, from the human resource company or the contractors, we might get directions to say that they can only work on the project for 50% of the time. And if you do that, then you place that, and Microsoft project will not exceed the maximum value for that resource to be used in this project. So it's quite an important and useful tool when you're dealing with staff that are already allocated or indeed part-time in their employment. Now the next column deals with their standard rate. So if their contract or their employment conditions say that they're on $50 an hour, well, this is where you'd place that condition in there. So that's quite straightforward. OVT stands for overtime. Now some employment conditions may direct a penalty fees or penalty units be applied for staff that are forced or made to work overtime. So if those conditions apply, you can then put an additional, say, it could be $100 an hour in this particular case, but it would be a higher amount for overtime fees. But I'm going to leave that blank. And then you have a cost per use column. Now this would apply for effectively getting your resource out there. For example, there's some tradespersons, plumbers and electricians come to mind, where they will charge a call-out fee. And this would be that one-off fee for effectively showing up. It might be $50, $100, whatever their conditions are. So there is an allowance here in Microsoft Project for you to put in a cost per use, effectively a cost for using them for that particular task. In this particular case, I'm going to leave it blank. So the next column is accrue at, and this gives us 3 options for the manner in which we're going to pay these staff. So it can either be we need to pay them up front or at the start of works. We may have an option there to pay as you go or a prorated arrangement, or we can choose to apply payment for these services after the job is done. So once again, Microsoft Project here is giving a number of options and flexibility to suit whatever work needs are applicable for this project. So I'm going to go through and start to populate all of the human resources as required for this project. Now we move onto the materials and starting to apply the costs associated with these. And these are simply a price per unit. So we might see that paint is $80 per tin, paper might be $10 per ream, stationery, let's just put in dollars for all of the stationery that we might need, 1 or more points of this project. And in a similar way, food too could be applied, and a drink as well. So quite easy and straightforward. We are also have an allowance here for cost per use. For example, this might be useful if you have a delivery fee. Price for this to actually show up. So we might say a delivery fee of $50 for our food and $50 for our drinks. Every time we use these materials, there is an associated fee there. So quite useful, as you can see. And lastly, you can see our miscellaneous fees consist of council fees, for example, permits or other taxes that are associated in order to get this job done. I'll just use the one example here for council fees, and as we mentioned earlier, we will go and populate the costs associated with that in our schedules when we get to that point. So we've quite comfortable, we can start now and get in the business of connecting our resources to our tasks. Okay, we have completed the resource sheet. Now we can go and start connecting tasks to our resources. Now there are a number of ways in which you can do this. However, in this video we'll look at 3 different ways. Firstly, by the assign resources function. Secondly, through the task information dialog box. And the third way is by making use of our resource names column in our worksheet next to the Gantt chart. So let's look at firstly the assign resources function. So there's 2 quick ways in which you can do this. So we look at this first activity here, obtain permits and permissions. You can simply right click on that and you'll be presented with a few options, and you can select assign resources, and then you'll be given some options in order to connect the resources that you need for that particular job. The other way is by selecting the task that you want to connect and going to the resource tab on your ribbon and simply selecting assign resources there, and then you can start to assign whatever resources that you'd like to do. So in this particular case, we'll look at maybe assigning some people. So we might look at getting John in on this task. And as you can see there at 100%, it aggregates there to $2,000. It calculates it automatically for you, which is convenient. And you recall that there were, in the resource sheet that we did just prior, there were 3 categories of resources. There is work, or in other words, people resources. There are material resources, and then there are one-off costs, and they're simply known as cost resources that we need to go in later and manually insert the costs associated with it. So this is rather timely because obtain necessary permits and permissions, you would expect some sort of fees to be incurred or associated with that. So we'll manually put in a figure. Let's put in $200. Now, if you do happen to assign a resource and then you regret it later, so we've assigned Peter there, we made a mistake, just simply click on remove and it will remove that resource for you. Once you've finished your resources and you're connecting those resources, you simply go close, and then you can see straight away we've got John and council fees of $200. Now, do you notice that we do have a little red man in the information column right on the left hand side of our worksheet? And if you hover over it, says this task is over allocated, and then click right for options. Now, do you remember that in our resource sheet, which we'll go to, our resource sheet here, the maximum amount that we could have John as a resource was 50%. We could only include John for 50% of the time. Now we, on the assign resources, had John at 100% of the time. So we need to go and fix that. How do we do this? Well, right click on the little red man and it will reduce the work for you. It can also increase the duration to spread out John's time at 50%, but we might choose to maybe reduce his work and abide by the conditions that we have for John. So click on that, and then straight away it defaults to the 50% maximum allowance for that resource. So that's quite convenient, isn't it? So that's a quick overview as to using the assign resources function. Now, the other method in which you can use, and we might look at our second task here, is by the task information dialog box. Now, to get that, you can double click on the task, and then you can see your task information dialog box will arrive. Now, we have a number of tabs here. You have general, predecessors. It's resources that we are most interested in. And we can start to go in a similar fashion to start to put in resources. And notice it conveniently defaults there, John at 50%, which is the maximum allowance rate, and we can start to put in extra resources that we feel are necessary to do the job. Once again, check for any licenses. We might see that we do need to pay an additional council fee, and we simply do that manually by putting the cost in the cost bar there, and it will do it for you. When you have finished, you click OK, and then straight away you can see the resources that we assigned are up on the Gantt chart for our display. You're welcome to look at videos 3 and 4, which shows how we can make adjustments to their bar charts if you don't like the idea of those names being spread all over the Gantt chart there. Now, the third method in assigning resources is by use of the resource names column. Now, when you want to add a new column to your worksheet, there are numerous options of different pieces of information that can be shown. I often find it's quite easy just to display this list, tap on the keyboard of the first letter of the area that we're looking for, so R for resource, and then it'll just snap straight to the resource names, which is what we're after. Now, this is quite convenient. You can see that the resources associated with each of the tasks that we've already completed have already been added in. So we can go in there now and start to use this to add some resources. So we might want to add John in. So you click the down button associated with it, click John, and it will do that for you. Now, the beauty of this method is it's quick and easy if we want to apply the same resource to multiple tasks in our project sheet. So we can simply, if all of these tasks required John at 50%, we could simply go drag down and then John is applied like so. Or we might just Control C, which is copy. We might see another task where we were going to start to use John. We can just Control V and it will do the same. So the resource names column is a quicker way to assign resources when you have multiple tasks with the same resource. Now, for convenience, I'm going to go through and add the resources that I feel are required against all of these tasks for this project. Okay, we've applied resources to all the tasks in our project. Now, before we move on to looking at some of the reporting features of Microsoft Project, there is something to be mindful of, and that's with relation to parallel tasks. So, for example, here we have two tasks that have the same resource, Peter, at 80%. Now, our resource sheet said that we can use Peter at 80% as a maximum resource loading. But when you stack tasks in parallel, well, that 80% in this case is really the same as saying 160%, which is certainly over allocated. So once again, this is why we can see our little red men here on the column like so. So what do? Well, there is a useful little function. We can right click on the little red person there and go reschedule to an available date. And when you do that, it will move the task at an appropriate date so that it doesn't go over the 80% loading as this particular example applies. So a really quick way to ensure that you're not over allocating your resources, and Microsoft Project taking some of the guesswork and some of the calculations away at your convenience. Now let's look at some of the resource reporting features that we have available. So what are the standard reporting features that we can use in Microsoft Project? Well, I invite you to go to your Report tab on your ribbon, and we'll see what's available here. You can see there's a number of useful reporting features. But seeing we've just assigned resources, and by resources we can also see some costs there, let's see what that reveals about the overall project now that we've assigned our resources. So under the resources function, you can click resource overview and see what that reveals. And straight away, it's a useful overview to see how much time is required by your people, your staff that's going to be working on this project. You can see work status. Well, it's no surprise that it hasn't started because we haven't recorded any progress against any of the tasks. But if we were to record some progress, so we go back to our Gantt chart and we can hypothetically just mark off these tasks as being complete. We can do that in our task ribbon, task 100% complete. Notice the change in our report. We go back to the report, resource overview, And straight away we can see the work that's been done and that is yet to be done. So this graph here nicely differentiates the actual work completed and what the remaining work is for each of our staff. And we can see the work status, how much work has actually been completed according to each staff's share in the project. So a really decent overview. Let's go back to report and look at the costs. It'll give you an overall cost estimate as to what this project's going to cost you. So let's have a look at cash flow. And we can see straight away that now that we've completed those tasks in that section there that we marked as 100% complete, we can see $6,500 of our project has already been spent. You can see the remaining cost and the overall cost shown there. It says here, this chart shows the project's cumulative cost and the cost per quarter. So this is another neat way in which Microsoft Project looks at the various quarters. So our project starts in June and finishes sometime in October. So the majority of works are going to be done in the July, August and September quarters. So you can see that nicely reflects that too, and is a very useful way to report high level costs and resources to senior management or to your desired audience. Now, what happens if you want to do a little bit more of a deep dive into the activities of your staff or your human resources? What can you use? Well, go to the drop-down menu in your top left-hand corner of your work screen where it says Gantt chart, and go to resource usage. And you'll notice here you get a grid-like formation of all of the resources that you're using, whether it be materials or one-off costs. In particular, your human resources. You can see John, Stacey, Peter and Joanne there. Now, if you want to do a quick filter of all the work that they're going to be doing as part of the project, you can expand like we've done so, and then you can expand that out and see what contribution they're going to be doing to the project. It's a convenient way to represent that. If you want to scroll back and just have a look at a month-by-month view, you go down to the bottom right-hand corner and zoom out, and it will organize those into months for you. So that could be quite convenient for reporting purposes. Or if you want to do more of a deep dive, you can drill right down almost to a day-by-day breakdown of your staff's contribution to the overall project. So once again, a number of different ways in which you can use your resources and monitor your resources to ensure that you are comfortable with the way the project's going. So by using our report functions, resources and costs, and looking at the resource usage sheet on our options here on the top left-hand corner of our worksheet, we can really improve our project management game by utilizing these and giving confidence to our project team and our project boards. Thank you for watching. All the very best with your project management. Please subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.